order tonight due to our graduation. So first, I'd like to ask if I could have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Passed. Now I'd like to know if there's anyone that is willing to volunteer to read the norms and speak to the norms after the meeting.
I will.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia.
Come prepared and be fully present, or the board will come prepared and be fully present and engaged. Deliberate effectively and listen openly without interrupting. Work collaboratively and strive for consensus. Maintain perspective with a sense of humor. Not repeat each other or ourselves. Not have side conversations. Give full attention to the proceedings. No cell phone use. Focus on the best interest of all students. And commit to no surprises.
Thank you. Appreciate that. What was the no cell phone?
That was 15 seconds too late on the no cell phone use. Work on the timing.
Excuse me.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so now I'll move on to the consent agenda. I'm wondering if there's any public comment on the consent agenda. Okay, in that case, seeing no public comment on the consent agenda, I'd ask for a motion for the approval of the consent agenda unless someone would like to remove anything from the consent agenda. Does anyone want to remove anything to discuss and vote on separately? Okay, no. So can I now ask for an approval?
So moved.
Thank you. How about a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. That passed. Okay, so now we're going to be going to the public hearing, so I'll be recessing the meeting. The meeting is now recessed, and now we've just opened the meeting for a public hearing for local control and accountability plan. The purpose of the hearing is to allow for public comment and recommendations regarding specific action and expenditures proposed to be included in the LCAP, which is the acronym for Local Control Accountability Plan. Okay, seeing no comment, we return to the meeting, and now I will recess again, and now we'll be holding a public hearing on the 2019-20 proposed budget, related reserve levels, and potential new parcel tax timeline. The purpose of the hearing is for public feedback on the proposed budget, which is available for review in the district office during business hours beginning June 7th, 2019. Is there any public comment on the hearing for the proposed budget? Thank you.
Yes. My name is Laura Effel. I live in Larkspur, and I'm also a director of the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. And my problem with the budget, you've heard this before, is that you continue to do deficit spending. I would like to see a budget that does not have deficit spending in it. I don't have particular problems with the items in the budget for the most part, but I believe that you need to get control of the budget sufficiently to stop the bleeding. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. Any other comments? Okay, we'll now return to our meeting and we'll move on to trustee considerations. The first agenda item under trustee considerations is take action on the tentative agreement, public disclosure in accordance with AB 1200 and associated salary schedule between TUHSD and CSEA. I believe that's Lars Christensen, and looks like Lars Christensen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, per the agenda and per your board packet, we respectfully request that you approve the tentative agreement with CSEA. We spent the year in positive, productive negotiations. We're happy that we've settled. It's a 2-year package, 1.5 salary increase for the 18-19 school year, this school year. And then we've agreed to establish a step 9 in year 2 on their current 8-step salary schedule. This year, in addition to that 1.5 increase, we, as you are aware, we converted a CSEA position in our business office from a classified position to a management position, our Director of Fiscal Services. And, you know, you have to negotiate. In doing so, we're obligated to negotiate to not fill that position. CSEA agreed that we wouldn't fill that position, and we have compensated them on schedule with the ongoing savings that we have recouped from that move to promote Mr. Diaquino to that position, reestablish that position that was already on the books. So, in addition to that TA on your agenda, you see there's associated salary schedules, and there is the AB 1200, which essentially we are required to report to the county office any negotiated settlements with our bargaining associations, and they sign off on them to make sure that we remain in fiscal good standing, if you will, in making these agreements with our unions. So the AB 1200 document is there as well. So again, respectfully request that the board approve the TA, the salary schedules, and the AB 1200.
Thank you, Lars. Before I open it up to public comment, I'd like to ask the trustees if there's any questions.
Lars, you may have mentioned this at one point, but I'm still interested. Turn your mic on, Lars.
Thank you. The ninth step, how many employees will move into that category?
It's roughly 40% of the unit. These are rough numbers. Approximately 150 people in the unit. Roughly 40% of those folks will move into that ninth step in the coming year.
Do you think that mitigates the additional work that these folks are taking on with the layoffs in mind?
I like to think so. You know, I
Okay.
think that really is a question you'd have to ask individually of all the persons who will be affected by this. Our unit is an older unit, though, with our PARS retirement incentive this year. As you know, we have a number of folks who are retiring in literally a couple of weeks. But there still are a significant number of people who will qualify for Step 9. This is something that the association has been asking for quite some time. So this year we made the decision to go that way in lieu of a traditional on-schedule salary increase.
Yeah, thank you.
And just to clear up, we don't create steps to reimburse people for extra work. I mean,
No.
we put it, so, yeah,
No.
so,
It's a longevity
yes.
item.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Dan or Kevin, do you have any questions before I open up to public comment? I keep looking over for the student trustees to ask them, but, yeah. So now I'd like to ask if there's any public comment on this agenda item, the tentative agreement. Okay, seeing none, then can I please ask for a motion to take action on the tentative agreement, approve the tentative agreement?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in, oh, okay.
I can talk about
You can unplug it and do it again, it should come back on. I tested it earlier and
Anyway, I second it.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, that passed.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. So you might as well stay standing. The next item is take action on the unrepresented confidential compensation agreement and salary schedules.
We have 3 confidential employees in our school district. They are the superintendent's secretary, my primary assistant, and the assistant to the CFO. Those 3 persons are not affiliated with the CSEA unit, though they are classified positions. So they negotiate separately for salary and benefits. And once again, we respectfully request that you support the tentative agreement with our 3 unrepresented employees. And it mirrors the CSEA tentative agreement in that it's a 1.5 salary schedule increase for the 18-19 school year. The 1.36, which is the equivalent of the savings we recoup from the not filling the classified position in the business office when we moved to Director of Fiscal Services. And then, like CSEA, the creation of a Step 9 on the confidential salary schedule. And with all of that, of course, is AB 1200 salary schedule and so forth.
Any comments or questions? Okay, so I'd like to ask if there's any public comment on this agenda item about the unrepresented compensation. Okay, thank you. So we have a public comment.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Laura Effel again. My comment actually could apply to any of the approvals of salary increases. And I've said this once before, and Laura seemed to make a joke of it, but I'm going to keep saying it until somebody remembers it at the right time. If you were to substitute for a portion of salary increases, bonuses, at least in some respects, you would save an enormous amount of money. I know that Lars knows the difference between salary and bonuses, unlike the joke he tried to make the last time I brought this up. But I will keep bringing it up until somebody remembers it at the right time. I suspect that today nobody will take it into account. But it is difficult to afford housing in Marin County. And I know that applies to almost everybody, with perhaps a few that it doesn't apply to. But increasing compensation by awarding a bonus does help with that problem without costing the district nearly as much money as a salary increase. And I hope that you will try to do this because you're still doing deficit spending, and I don't know when it's going to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and just thank you for your comments. I just want to assure you the board knows the difference between an on-salary, on-schedule increase and a bonus as well, and are making choices to give the on-schedule increase.
What is it that we call it? And we don't call it a bonus. It's a but we call it. There's another term I've always heard you
It's
use.
usually referred to as an off-salary schedule
Off salary. Okay.
increase.
Right. We've done those.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
And, it's also, for the record, those are negotiated.
Right. With the
They have to
union.
be agreed
right.
upon.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other clarifications? Okay, I think then we're ready to have a motion. Can I ask for a motion then, please, to take action on the take action on the management salary schedules?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's
Right, I'm
the
not-
confidential.
Management
Okay,
next.
thank you. I need my reading
So
glasses. not
I
my-
move to
You too.
approve the confidential employee salary schedule.
Second.
Is that right?
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to take action on the management salary schedules.
Thank you, President Harlander. And as I move into the management compensation increase, I should note that I failed to mention with both the CSEA TA and the unrepresented employee or confidential employee TA, also a health cap was instituted for any new employees going forward, a $20,000 health cap, and that will be true of management too once we jump into this right now. So with management, we also negotiated with our managers, and we have settled on a tentative agreement that we respectfully ask your approval of, and it is a 1.5 on-schedule compensation increase for the 18-19 school year, a 2.5% on-schedule compensation increase for the following school year, 19-20. I mentioned the health cap of $20,000 for all new management employees. And then the fourth item is the reinstatement of retiree health benefit coverage. Management will receive the same retiree health benefits as do our certificated group, or TFT. So that was, it predates me, but apparently that was removed at one point. in the last decade or so, and we're reinstating that with your approval.
And I'm sorry to ask you this, but I was distracted by your ties either talking to the microphone or something. Can you restate what we're reinstating? I just want to make sure that I hear
Yes.
that. Yeah. Thank you.
Should a person retire
Okay.
prior to age 60, in between 60 and 65, that retiree would receive medical benefits to get them to age 65 where Medicare would kick in.
Okay.
And that's in the teacher contract. It at one time was part of the management contract.
Mm-hmm.
We're reinstating that.
Okay.
Right now, there's one person eligible in the unit for that. Should they retire, and they're not.
Okay. Any clarifications or questions from board members? Okay. Public comment.
Just asking for clarification on the health benefit reinstatement for retirees, specifically what are the criteria for vesting for that, and what is the cost per employee to do that? And what consideration did you give to that versus going on healthcare exchanges like everybody else does?
So I'm going to turn to the superintendent and see if this is something that we could follow up with maybe Willard, or if there's any short answer now, you're welcome to it, but otherwise, is this something you can provide?
I don't have that data right now.
Okay.
I can follow up with Mimi and provide her with that data.
Perfect, thank you.
I mean, I think we can say some of it. You have to be employed for at least 10 years.
10 years in the district.
To be vested. I don't have the cost of exactly what that would be per. We don't have anyone retiring right now, so it would also obviously determine when that person was retiring, what the cost would be. But we can get that from the business office.
I think the information, may I jump in?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
So the information that we should provide is what the cost is to the district. I don't believe we have an obligation to go out and compare it to systems that we're not using. That's just my.
So I'm going to leave it to the superintendent to work with Mimi on however you can work these questions out. Work these answers out, not questions. Okay, now I'd like to ask for a motion to approve. Thank you.
So moved.
Thank you, because I'm really having trouble. Okay, can I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. And I'll turn mine off in between.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Dr. Tartopier will take action on amended contract salary addendum for Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Facilities.
Sure. So this is both the D and E are Lars and Corbett's contracts, and their contracts, the increases reflect those given to TFT membership or the teachers membership, minus the the cost sharing pieces that were specific only to TFT. So for theirs, it's the on salary schedule raises of 2.5 and 1.5. No, just a 2. Oh, sorry, just 1 year. That's right, just 1 year. So it's just for this year, and it matches the TFT salary increase on schedule percentage only.
Any questions? Any public comment? And we're dealing with item D. Okay, can I ask for a motion to take action on the amended contract salary addendum for Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Facilities?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, aye. Please say aye. Aye. Thank you, that passed. And now we'll go on to the next one, take action on the contract salary addendum. Wait, is there any public comment on the taking action of the contract salary addendum for the chief financial officer? Okay, seeing no public comment, can I ask for a motion to take action on the contract salary addendum for the chief financial officer?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, that passed. Now we'll move on to the local control and accountability plan presentation. Okay, thank you.
Being visited by some spirits in here tonight. Good evening, everybody. So this is our annual LCAP, or Local Control and Accountability Plan update. So we're going to cover the goals, the updates that will be included in the LCAP, and then some of the data being used to evaluate action steps. Just a reminder of what the 8 state priority areas are. We are required to address all 8 of these areas in our LCAP goals and in our metrics. These are the indicators in our dashboard, just to give you more specifics on how the state evaluates our data. We have state indicators and then 4 local indicators. So what that means is the state indicators, we submit data and they come up with categorization. The local indicators, that's our own. We evaluate ourselves. We do a self-evaluation in those areas. So the performance areas on the new dashboard are in these color order. Sorry, Leslie, but they're also on a dashboard. So they go from red, which is not good, all the way up to blue. And there's multiple measures that go into it. So a red means that you are, performing low and you're decreasing. Whereas you could be performing well and decreasing, but still be in the blue category. So it's a cross-reference list, which I'll get into when we talk a little bit more. And then on the local, we supply a narrative and explain that we've either met, not met, or not met for 2 years, any of the metrics. So this is what the new dashboard looks like. I just want to point out that if there were fewer than 30 students, then we didn't get a performance measure for those. So for some of our student groups, we don't have, I'm not touching them all, I swear. We don't have performance data, but we were able to look at some other ways of evaluating. Just a reminder that this, the LCAP is really a cycle of inquiry, where we plan and set goals, we implement them, and then, we go through this process of reviewing data to see, how are we doing? Are we actually meeting those goals? Are we on target or not? And then where we are is updating the LCAP based on that. These are our 4 LCAP goals. Sorry. So in goal area 1, which is largely about sort of the conditions of teaching, so that you have facilities in good repair, you have textbooks, you have teachers that are highly qualified, and that you have curriculum, that you're maintaining curriculum cycle and a broad course of study for students. So in that area, a lot of ours speaks to broad course of study. All of our teachers this past year were considered highly qualified in teaching within their credentialed area, which is great. We are about to enter our 4th year of next generation science standard curriculum development. We implemented physics in the universe this year, and we will be launching the Living Earth next. And during this next school year, we will be developing Chem in the Universe course of study, or Chem and Earth systems. We also have a next generation social studies and history standard task force that is looking at developing, we are developing and we're getting feedback on a series of learning progressions on historical thinking skills. We also have maintained our curriculum cycles which are required to be updated at least once every 5 years. So we're maintaining our courses of study to make sure that they're accurate and up to date. In the coming year, we will be looking at, we'll be taking a deeper dive into our graduation requirements, and really taking a look at, next year is an LCAP renewal year, and looking at sort of grounding this in our values, and what do we want our students to know and be able to do, and in what kind of climate and culture, and do our grad requirements actually support that? Do they reflect that? So are we actually valuing what we say we are? So that's going to be a lot of the work of our broader community curriculum council as well as LCAP next year. Yeah.
And so the next generation science standards and the social science standards are supplementary to the Common Core?
They are complementary.
Or complementary.
Complementary is what I would say, yes. They build off of those concepts.
The concepts of reading across and the critical thinking and all that.
And doing more, like doing the work of a historian, doing the work of a scientist rather than reading about is I think, is how I would classify some of the bigger shifts in those areas. Yeah, Barbara.
I don't know if it's appropriate at this time. Can you comment about the evolution of the ethnic studies program?
Sorry.
Of course. Oh.
Yeah, ethnic studies was launched this year for the first time as an offered course in the district. We took a year to develop it. The state had an ethnic studies, I don't know if it was a Senate bill or Assembly bill, that was going to, it started off saying it was going to require it, but then that was vetoed. So now it's coming back saying you have to offer it. And so that's in the makes. And we decided we were going to offer it whether it was required by the state or not. And it is a really robust course, I think. We took a lot of time to develop it. It is taught through the lens of critical race theory and analyzes critical race theory as well as some other lenses, and looks at various populations within the United States and the experience they've had throughout history in the United States, particularly with systemic oppression and racism. Yeah, it's and so that is a semester-long course, and we are looking eventually to develop a second semester to that would look more closely at systems in the United States, and through that same lens.
My understanding is that TAM does not have the signups for it for next semester.
It doesn't have it for next semester, but we have a plan moving forward, and part of that is that we are evolving our SOAR program and into ethnic studies classes, because it's a lot of the same work, and we're looking at ethnic studies paired with service learning, so that the idea would be that they could deepen their learning and then also do some service to the community. Okay, so some of the data that we have for Goal 1 is here. We were pretty flat in this data. We didn't necessarily increase or decrease in any of these areas. We are hoping to, obviously those first two, students from unduplicated. Unduplicated is a term that the state uses, and that refers to students who are identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged, foster youth, English language learners. And the reason they are identified that way is they tend to be some of the lowest performing students and struggle the most in our systems. So the state identifies them for extra services, and it's another way of disaggregating our data to make sure we're serving all students. So some more data. So I wanted to pull in the dashboard so that everyone could see this. This is publicly available. This is the California State Dashboard, and all of our district data is available on that. You can dig down and you can get it at the school level too. I didn't quite go that far, but I just wanted to highlight some things. College readiness was part of this. As you can see, for us, we're in blue for all students. which is great. We want to be blue. But the reason we really need to disaggregate data is, we have our unduplicated populations tend to be very small and can be sort of veiled in positive data. So if you don't disaggregate it, then you're missing a lot of pieces of students that we're underserving. And students with the disabilities being college ready, which is the state identifies as completing the UCs or completing a CTE pathway, which is Career Technical Education Pathways, scoring certain proficiency on the California assessments. So it's a combination of things that can make someone college ready and graduating, things like that. So our students with disabilities also tend to struggle meeting the UC A to G requirement. So they're yellow, as you can see. Even though they've increased a little, it's still a low percentage of college ready. So some good news was that 2 groups that we had been focusing on in the last year did increase their college readiness. And I think one thing to highlight is that across all of our student groups, we increased in this area. So that's a highlight. Sorry. And then goal 2 is really more about outcomes. So you can see all of this. This is the work that we're doing in this area. One of our biggest sort of focus areas over the last 2 years has been AVID implementation. That's been going very well. The data, our local data on AVID, is that students enroll in AVID year over year have seen increased GPAs, increased attendance rates, college going rates. So next year will be the first year we'll have sort of a cohort of seniors that will be able to really have that senior data. So that will be exciting for us. So here's some of the dashboard data. This just remind people the CASP is the California assessment. So this is for English language arts and mathematics. So this is one of those areas where unfortunately we've declined. We stayed green because our scores are still above the standard. But this is an area of concern for us that we declined across the boards. And as I said, unlike the last one where we were increased across the boards, we declined across the boards here. So these are our math scores.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
And I'll disclose my bias as far as English language arts, but and because math can be tough because of what level they test at 11th grade, and some people may be in calculus and they're testing algebra 2. English shouldn't be tough because they're testing where an 11th grade student is and you can't skip sections of English or years of English. So that's a significant decline, 15.7 points. And this is the 18-19 date, or the 7. It's the 2018
This
test.
is the 18th, 2018
right,
administration.
18, yes. So did the departments do anything around this work to parse out what
They did.
led to the decline?
In the fall, unfortunately this year we didn't have district-wide department meetings, but at the sites they did use the data to dive in and try to take a deeper look at where students are missing the mark. In response to this, part of what the math task force is going to be doing in the fall is implementing a common assessment. We don't have any in-house common assessments for our algebra students at this point. We're going to be administering a common assessment for the purposes of identifying and diving in a little more closely to see where our students aren't meeting the mark. And both the English and math task forces are working on common assessments for the coming year so that we have benchmarks sooner than junior year, which we don't have right now.
Okay. And the reading, we're making sure students do reading?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So here are our ELA scores. So again, not our best showing, declined across the board. So we also administered the test a little differently at TAM this year, in that we had the kids test just in their classroom with their teachers, rather than in large groups. So we're also looking at, how can we shift the environment a little to see if that will also improve performance.
How do we, one of the student trustees talked about that students don't take the test seriously. And so, and I would never explain away declines based on that, because.
Right, correct.
But how do we, are sites going to discuss ways to?
Yeah, I think, this year it seemed to lapse a little bit. The year before, we had really done a push of, these may not be on your transcript, but certainly colleges can see them and see how we compare to other districts, and it's going to look bad if our scores are significantly lower. That's going to weigh into their decision of how they look at our grades. So if we have, if we're looking at a comparative district and their scores are 30 points higher than ours, then 2 A's in English might look very differently to a college admission person.
And do you explain that to teachers too? Because where I teach, there are some teachers that just say, these tests, they're, standardized testing, don't worry about it. They're not worth anything. They denigrate the test as well in my district where I am. Yeah,
I've heard that a little bit. I've had the great fortune of administering this test with Ms. Jaime several years. And we tried to say, and we try to say this to the teachers, like, it behooves us to have our district look good. It doesn't help any of us to have our kids not taking this test seriously. It is a reflection. And people, if I'm moving to Northern California, one thing I can look at is this, to say, well, how is this district doing? How do they compare to other districts? And so I think it is one data point for people to consider. Yeah.
Is there any correlation with absence rates?
I haven't checked, but I don't know, our SAT scores haven't followed this pattern, so I think there is something to say around effort and caring, right? I think if these were indicative of the learning, we would see dips in those things as well. ACT scores, SAT scores, and we haven't.
When do you bring those to the board, just as a qualitative
usually in the fall, we do a student achievement report in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the goal 3, and this is largely around community building and communication. So this is just some of the things that we changed. I think it's worth highlighting that we now have a monthly newsletter that goes out to the community. We have created a communications protocol across all school sites and all management teams, so that we have consistency in how we communicate and to whom and about what. So all those things are important. We had 2 community groups this year, Fiscal Advisory as well as LCAP, and I do want to thank Lisa Graham for being here tonight. She was a veteran LCAPer. She was on our 2 years in a row, so thank you, Lisa. And this year we also conducted a district-wide survey. That was an LCAPS and Fiscal Advisory survey, but it did ask questions regarding communication, which I'll show you in a minute. We got over 1,300 responses to that survey.
And that was out of how many that you sent the survey to? Do you know?
9,000.
Yes, what I thought. Well, no, that's a good return rate,
Yeah,
actually, for a survey.
Yeah.
Does that survey break out what areas the survey respondents were from, the geographical locations?
It did not. It asked what school their
school?
student attended. Yeah.
Okay.
So this was some of the local survey data. This is some of the trending data we follow. The California Healthy Kids Parent Survey. We've administered 2 administrations in a row, so those are 2 years apart. And some good news here is that we had an increase in respondents of about 100 respondents on the parent side, which was good. And the the 73% of parents who responded felt they were encouraged to participate was up from 69% the previous year. The 77% of parents who responded that they feel encouraged them to participate with school in some fashion was also up from about 71. So those are encouraging. And 75% of parents on our survey reported that they were satisfied with the communication from the district office. So goal 4 is our student wellness. We have a lot of work going on in this area. Some of it continued work and some of it new. Specifically, I want to point out the RAIN training is a new training. And this is training that it has both prevention, sexual harassment and sexual assault prevention, but it really also focuses on supporting survivors, which is a shift. You know, how do we encourage reporting? How do we present in a way that someone who is reporting won't feel alienated, shut down? Unfortunately, that can be a difficult thing to hear from a student, and oftentimes, sometimes the response might be like, whoa, let me find somebody, and that can make somebody recoil from further responding, or further reporting. So the idea of, it's almost like how do you be a front line, and at least warmly receive the information and redirect to the appropriate person, and then how do we continue to provide supports for students and have the right resources available.
Can you speak to the school refusal intervention plan a little bit?
Sure. So Wes Cedros, our Senior Director of Student Services, and Jessica Colvin, our Director of Wellness, are working on developing a program that would allow students to re-enter gradually. And what that might look like is you might have I don't know what to call it. It wouldn't be an academic workshop, but you would have a teacher who would be assigned to this intervention. So I might be the reintegration teacher, and I might have special training in trauma-informed practices. And the idea would be to start a student in this classroom for a couple of periods a day, and then try to get them to attend one regular class and come back to this class. And so the idea would, can we get them to school? Can we provide a space that they feel safe in and start slowly integrating them back into general ed classes without it being sort of like an all or nothing, or they have to transfer to Tamascal because Tamascal is reaching full. So how do we create spaces on our comprehensive campuses where we can do a reintegration for students who are either having anxiety or school refusal issues for some reason? The chronic absenteeism policies we're continuing to work on and evolve. When we dug into the data, and Wes is doing a little more of this, we found that a fair percentage, like 24% of those absenteeism are the same 30 kids. And so how do we target those kids, and those are really the school refusal students. So we're not ready to implement that. We're still looking at structure and how to develop what that would look like. Okay. So some of the data for this goal fits into what they call climate and culture. So our graduation rates, again, are kind of a little bit mixed. Our students with disabilities struggling a little bit there. Yes.
So 85% of our students with disabilities graduate, but only 18.5% were prepared for college. Is that right?
By the state, yes.
Okay.
Not related to the slide, but so just want to provide one clarification with some of the ELA numbers and math from before. Some of those numbers looked like significant declines in terms of the results, showing a 12-point decline. But given it was a scale of 2,300 to 2,800, and most of those 12 points is less than 0.5%. So not so alarming in terms of this context of those.
Thank you. So some good news here is that, again, some of our targeted students, particularly our Latino and socioeconomically disadvantaged students, increased their graduation rates, which I think speaks to some of the programs that we have been putting in place, Compass, Student Success Network, to help support students sort of get across that finish line successfully.
Is there a specific plan that Drake is going to be using to address their decline in graduation rates?
They have probably the strongest AVID program right now. And that is really where we're focusing a lot of the energy and making sure that we're trying to target enrollment in AVID. We're still adjusting who's getting into, making sure that the right students are getting into AVID has been a little bit of an adjustment that we're trying to look at Drake to make sure it really is supporting those students, socioeconomically disadvantaged students particularly.
So the graduation rates look pretty good. And in the fall, I think, or the spring, some open house, we talked about that you had some questions about, for want of a better word, resiliency of graduates when they go to college, and the stick-to-itiveness, right, making up a word. And so that's not included in the LCAP data, but
we do look at, and I usually try to bring that in the fall too with the achievement. We look at persistence rates. Yeah. And hopefully those have improved. So I just wanted to also just put it all on one page for you so you can see, obviously our African American students declining in graduation rates is concerning. It is a very small number of students, so that's why there isn't a dashboard for it. And so suspension rates, we maintained here. Our suspension rates are okay. So this is the one that's different, right? You want to decline in these. So declining numbers actually get you to blue in suspension data. So one of our big targeted ones we had 2 years ago, largely disproportionate suspension of our African American students. And so that is down from about 15.4% suspension rate. So we're making strides, looking at more restorative practices, looking at engagement in the classroom. This is part of our culturally responsive pedagogy. How do we make sure that we are engaging in practices and curriculum that kids can see themselves in and that in which they want to engage?
Did we disaggregate it for students with disabilities?
We did. There it is.
Okay, great.
So overall, our suspension data was improved this year. We still have concerns that TAM has about the same discipline as both Redwood and Drake combined. So we're looking at targeting some interventions down there and working with Principal Farr around restorative practices, positive behavioral intervention systems, things like that, to implement some new systems because something's not working. And again, just to give this to you all in one place instead of trying to look at the several slides. And then our chronic absenteeism data is getting worse. So we have been in conversation with both the union and with our principals around, really trying to, one, make sure we're following our policies that are in place and making sure we're putting in place attendance contracts, regardless of excused or unexcused. More of our absences are excused than unexcused. Really trying to work with parents around, and this was also a question we asked in our survey around why kids are missing. What I found interesting is if you look at the California Healthy Kids data and look at our chronic absenteeism data, they do not match because kids don't report how often they're absent or they think they're absent less than they are. But there's a disconnect between those two data sets, which is really interesting. Anecdotally, Barbara, Leslie, and I met with Tam High news kids and asked them point blank about attendance. And it was really interesting that many of the students in there said when they missed class, it was most often to do homework. And that the sense I got, this is my interpretation of what they were saying, was that there was a higher value placed on the homework than what was done in class. And they felt it was more important to complete the homework than to be in class. So that was a really interesting data point for me. They thought, well, I can miss class, but I can't be late with that homework. So it was a very interesting, I just wondered about the messaging that our students are getting about class time.
Did you ask what sort of homework?
We did. I mean, they said kind of all kinds of homework. They weren't really specific. I don't know if you guys remember, but...
Well, because I see an uptick in absences around due dates for papers. Right? Or if there's a big chemistry test or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, and those are all homework, but that's not the same as nightly homework.
Right. I don't know that they distinguish at that level. We have been speaking about particularly some of the quandaries that our teachers find themselves in this week, where students who have been absent a lot suddenly want to hand in a lot of work. And, the idea of like, well, we want you to demonstrate learning, but this was learning from January. So there's, we've been looking at potential solutions of maybe changing some policies around you can hand work in, late work within the grading period that it was assigned and not after, to try to sort of hem in some of this, extra burden on our teachers to be doing all of this. It's hard enough to keep up with grading, but if you suddenly get piled on top when you're trying to finish out your semester, and when it's an excused absence and the expectation is that you'll accept the late work, but how do we I think for me, it's like, let's start refocusing on the learning, and not just handing that work in now because the semester's ending.
Right, and just to expand on that a little bit, so not only for the teachers, but often if that homework's done at that late, it's disconnected, I think you said, from the learning.
From the learning.
And it also continues to build the stress in the student because they're not only trying to get all those assignments in, they're trying to keep up with the class, they're trying to prepare for finals, and so they're doing themselves a disservice, ultimately, and increasing their stress. So the grading period sounds like that might be a constructive way to manage it for the students as well and tie it closer to the learning.
Sure. Barbara, did you have?
I have a concern with these numbers around the pedagogical strategy of project-based learning, because these children are not there. And then for the teacher to have to come up with a new project in order to get the youngster across some arbitrary finish line. I'm really concerned about this.
Yeah. We are too.
Can we require parents to come to Saturday school?
Can we? Sure. We can.
Well, right. I mean, because I think that's part of the message is making it clear to parents the value of being in the classroom and what's expected in the classroom, because a lot of parents in this community and the community where I teach view it as optional. And that they're not missing out. Just give us a worksheet, just give us the work that was done in class without seeing what the contribution the students expected to make in the daily operation of the classroom, as well as learning from their peers and the teacher.
Sure.
So I think that's a message that has to go to parents as well.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I echo that. I think the parents are critical in this equation, and I sometimes wonder if some of it's just the change of the workforce in some ways. People are more accustomed to teleworking and doing work at night and working, and we need to get the message to the parents somehow. I know at the beginning of last year there was a lot more emphasis. I appreciated that with the principals, but maybe it
we sent
fell
something
off.
from the district office too, and we followed up in January with it as well. and the principal sends something sort of. What we're also doing is looking at when the highest absenteeism rates are and trying to target communications during the beginning of those months. As a reminder, March, we know it's a long month, but, and try to remind parents to keep track of how many absences their students have, because that's the big thing, is a lot of times if you say to a parent, well, this is 10 absences, they say, oh, no, it's not. And you're like, oh, no, here it is. And because you forget, right? It was like an absence here and an absence there, but then they stack up. And then 10 absences is 2 weeks of school. It's a lot of learning to miss. So some of our school climate data. And these were, so across the board, our California Healthy Kids survey data is pretty flat. It hasn't really changed significantly one way or the other.
Even though it hasn't changed, are we concerned with, say, the 62% of ninth and 74% of 11th graders? And maybe ninth graders haven't fit in as well, but
I think that, we've been, every year, I think the schools look at new ways of trying to, one, build relationships. I don't know if I said this in here, but one thing that both Redwood and TAM did that I thought was a really great exercise was they took some of what they would call their most at-risk kids and put their pictures on sort of poster board and put them around the room without their names on them at a staff meeting, and had staff go around with Post-its and say, or check marks. Put a check mark if you know the student's name. Put 2 check marks if you know something personal about them. Put 3 if you know an instructional strategy that works well for them. And so when they were done with that, you were literally able to see who's falling through the cracks. Because if you had a kid with like 1 or 2 check marks, you're like, okay, here's a kid that doesn't have a strong connection to the school. And so then they, what TAM did these last 2 years is they had a mentor program where students were assigned a staff mentor. They checked in once a week. And they did celebratory things also. They had, whole lunches with the mentors, mentees. And we saw improved attendance this semester at TAM through that process, improved, and students reporting that they felt more connected to the school. So I know that's something that Redwood is also looking at implementing.
Was that process aided and abetted by the SAR process in the schools?
It was born out of the Success Network, and not the SAR process, but it was so part of the, sort of the idea of tracking some of our most at-risk students and then connecting them with an adult on campus. We continue to look at ways that SARB can be impactful for us. And we did start seeing more of them, like the STARTs, the site-based ones. We continue to struggle with the SARB being a really effective process for us. And we've talked about this at the county level too, that it continues to sort of be a struggle. Whereas when we have SARB'd kids out and then they've come back, we haven't seen improve attendance from that. So we're trying to take a path of can we make connections for the kids at school so that they want to be here and they're missed when they're not, because that's the other piece. Is there an adult saying, hey, where's Tara? How come she's not here? And that's what this mentor program and this Success Network is really trying to build. That there's somebody who's going to call you if you're not there, who's going to check in on you, which is, hopefully so that we don't get to a SARB, right? It's the idea that we don't have to SARB a kid out. But we are continuing to look at sort of the data on SARBs and how they can be more effective for us.
There's a lot of data
on
SARBs, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, this district has held a tone of that it's punitive. And the work that's been done in SARB is far from that, but rather it's a mandate that we all can support these youngsters, and that intervention can be a piece of that.
Yeah.
we're also trying to work on the district attorney in this county.
Yes.
They have not heretofore taken up their responsibility to give us the kind of support that we need. And I, in the last SAR meeting where I attended, I worked with the DA to press on this, our county DA, to participate as they are responsible to do and accountable to do, which they have not done. So I'm waiting to hear and see that continuum of a mandated responsibility that we all have that's already there to be used. We don't have to come up with new techniques or interventions. It's all laid out there.
Right. Yeah, and we've been in contact with the district attorney as well.
And I commend the sites for working on because we've done the same thing at Alameda with putting the pictures up and then adopting a kid and checking in on them. And I've mentioned this book to you, The Make or Break Year, out of the University of Chicago, looking at how important that freshman year is on making those contacts and tracking those absences. And it's not just freshman year, but to the extent that you can bring some of those tenets to all of the teachers about being conscious of absences so that there's a team approach, then I think fewer kids would be less likely to slip between the cracks.
Right.
I'm not clear how the students are initially identified as high risk. It sounded like you had already identified the
coming
students.
in. We get their CUME files, so if they're coming in with a high rate of absenteeism already, low grades, low scores on the CASP, a disciplinary history.
Okay, so that's how you chose them. Okay.
Yeah. So I just pulled some things out of, instead of recreating it from, this is the California Healthy Kids Survey, just so you could see some of the how the different groups responded to feeling safe on campus, because it breaks out a little differently.
It's interesting because they all go up the older you get, except for African American.
Right. Yep. Who feel? Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting data point for us to consider. So these are the 6 reasons. The 6 reasons are listed at the bottom. And again, you can see a drastic increase from freshman to junior year for African Americans, feeling that they've been harassed. And so, just to speak to this a little bit, we've been dealing with a lot of stuff this semester in this district, and just to briefly speak to moving forward, looking at really targeting some climate and culture work next year. It's not fully baked yet, but for me, over the last semester, more than that, but and really reflecting on some of this data, the 2 values of respect and responsibility kept coming into my head as things that I think we really need to focus on. Defining what it means to respect one another as humans, as coexisters in this learning climate, as co-learners. What does it mean to be inclusive and accepting of everyone? And what is our responsibility as individuals to ensure that? I'm a firm believer that culture doesn't happen to you, you contribute to it. So how do we start shifting the culture on our campuses? And it has to involve students. And the responsibility is a collective one in which we all have to own these things. And we all have to be responsible and respectful. And I think there's ways of setting clear expectations and providing space for conversation and support around what that looks like for all of our students. Because we have a lot of work to do. A lot. So the drug and alcohol use, this has also been flat across the years, and still not good. And this is, I think, another thing around. I feel like respect and responsibility comes into all of these things. How do we respect ourselves? How are we responsible for our own well-being and health? Again, these were all pretty consistent. There were no major changes in this data and actually Wes has been tracking for 5 years, and there really isn't movement over 5 years. The vaping is new. It's a new question. Yeah. Right. So this was the first administration that they actually had the e-cigarette and vaping question on. Mm-hmm. Again, there's not really any major shift in these data either. We have augmented our suicide prevention and suicide awareness programs at all of our sites. We have, starting next year, it's a mandate from the state, but all student IDs will have to have the National Suicide Prevention Hotline posted. We are also going to post the National Sexual Assault Hotline on ours as well. We have also put the National Sexual Assault Hotline posters in all of our bathrooms on our campuses across, just trying to get some more resources out to our students.
Is there a reason those are limited to the bathrooms as opposed to the classrooms?
Oh, sorry, they went into both, but we started in the bathrooms. Sorry. I think we started in the bathrooms because we had a set number, and then in the fall we're going to send them out to all teachers that they can put up, and they are in both English and Spanish. So next steps. As you've heard me say, next year is an LCAP renewal year. So we have a larger stakeholder group that will participate. That communication will go out in August. I will put something in my June newsletter as well. That was feedback from our LCAP committee. Areas of focus you can see. I think one thing that the LCAP committee said, I think pretty clearly to me, was that we need to add a goal that is specific to equity and anti-racism next year, and I think that is true. I think that's sound advice.
And you have trustees on that committee as well?
Yes.
Okay.
2 of you. Lisa, do you have anything you want to add as a committee member?
I think it was a great process. It was actually only my first year, but thank you for getting
Oh, I thought it was your second year.
But I will say that Tara, she's amazing to work with. I think the way the meeting...
I did not ask her to say this.
No, she did not. But I have to say that because let's face it, not every superintendent is invested into the depth of wanting every child to succeed. And I definitely felt that going in. My feedback is there were never enough meetings. We had a great group, and I think it was a group of people who did really go deep into the issues. We weren't just there to skim the surface. So my hope in going forward is that it continues to go deep. I think that everything that's presented here needs much deeper attention as a school district. I think the events of just this past week indicate we have big issues that can no longer be just held within the board or the district. It has to be held within the community, all of us as parents playing our role. I will say in response to the piece about connectedness among kids of color, I've heard that numerous times from my own kids' friends, that they've never felt connected to their school. They felt connected to San Andreas, I think. There's a different way of doing business there, but I think it's really time for the larger comprehensive university or institutions to also be that welcoming environment. So it's really exciting to see some of the things that are happening. Two things that I would love to propose to the board and even school people here, things that I saw recently that I think are powerful. One is Circles, and it's based on the continuation school in East Oakland. Eric Butler is a restorative justice. He's basically a youth advocate, and he took this role on out of passion for trying to help to elevate kids, the most at-risk kids in East Oakland, onto a better life than living in the streets. And the film is powerful. It was just filmed here recently at the Rafael Theater, unfortunately only for one day. But if you get a chance, you can probably Google it and find it. I would highly recommend seeing it, Circles. The other one is a film called Bad Kids, and it's a horrible name, but it's about a continuation school in the Mojave Desert. And it's one principal's approach to how you actually keep kids in school because of chronic absenteeism. It's to your point, and I think to Tara's, is just, believe it or not, it was out of passion that the principal did make sure that every single kid was in class, even if it meant she got in her car and drove to their home. So I know it's a much smaller student body to work with than some of the larger schools, but I do believe it comes down to respect and responsibility, and I think we can envelop all these kids if we just every single one of us, take notice of them each day and invite them in. So I hope this new board of directors, because I'm new to seeing all of you, some of you I know, will continue to really work on these things. I think the last thing I would say is with Corey outgoing. I know him personally, and I've seen the work that he's done with my son who transferred from Drake to San Andreas. Phenomenal guy who knows exactly how to build relationships with young people, and hopefully he'll be a great role model for the next person coming in and to talk with the other schools, because I think we have best practices right within our district as well as around. So hopefully we'll do that without spending more money to do it. Thank you.
Corey was also a member of our LCAP committee. Do you have anything, Corey?
That was said beautifully by both of you. So no.
Thank you. So any further questions from the board?
Thank you for that presentation. That was very informative. And thank you for the work that both of you did on the LCAP committee. It's heartwarming to hear that people are committed and they come to the meetings and they dig deep and they care about meeting the needs of all students, which is a task before the board. So I appreciate your help on this.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank you. It's helpful, too, to have this the same night that we're looking at the budget and trying to keep the budget priorities in line is always a challenge. So thank you. So now, thank you. Ask for public comment, or do any other board members have any comments? Barbara, I think you had a comment. Oh. It used to be Chuck and Barbara that did all the talking when it came, and now it's you and Barbara when it comes to some of the curriculum stuff. But I always learn something, so thank you. So now I'd like to ask, is there public comment on the Local Control Accountability Plan, otherwise known as LCAP presentation? Nope? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the first reading of the LCAP ESSA addendum.
This was just an attachment. The ESA addendum is really about how we are spending our title funds, which are federal dollars. So that was a document. I don't know if there's any questions.
I had no questions. Yeah, it was just, okay. So there's no action on this one. It's just the first reading. Okay. Now we'll go to public comment on the first reading. If anyone read the LCAP ESSA, it was in the board packet. Okay, no public comment. Thank you, Tara, for the reminder. Now we'll move on to discussion of the 2019-2020 proposed budget, related reserves. Corbett Elson, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure this evening to propose our 2019-20 budget for our district. Process-wise, it's a lot of content, so I'm not going to read every slide to you. There's no surprises in this. But feel free to interrupt me at any time. Of course, if you have any questions, I'm not going to touch on every bullet. You will see that there's several purple slides, and those are natural transitions where I'll pause to give people an opportunity to ask any questions. But again, do not be shy to interrupt me if a question comes up. So here we go. So what are the steps that are involved with the budget adoption process? First part that is often overlooked is we're still living in the 2018-19 school year. We are estimating our actuals for this school year. It's kind of like a third interim, if you will. We have a first interim, a second interim, and a third interim. So we're actively looking, trying to provide accurate information where we estimate our actual budget surplus or deficit will land at the end of the school year. So there's some adjustment done there. We'll do our full analysis of that in September with our unaudited actuals. I'll touch on that some more. Obviously, we're proposing our 2019-20 budget. This is highly inclusive of community stakeholder input. Much of what Tara talked about, how she engaged the community, is very much inclusive in this budget. So I'm not going to read that to you, but you'll see all the fiscal advisory recommendations, all the agreements we've made on class size changes, et cetera, all inclusive in the budget proposal tonight. And lastly, at the second board meeting in June, when we hopefully will adopt a budget, we do have to certify whether we have a positive, qualified, or negative certification. I'll steal the surprise right now. I'm recommending a positive certification. So agenda, you've seen this before. I'm going to talk about our usual budget reporting cycle, key assumptions, what's changed since second interim, STRS and PERS increases. That's a regular talking point. Other funds besides the general fund, and then moving forward, what are multi-year projections? This is the first time we're going to see the 2021-22 school year brought into our multi-year projections. So we'll have a first time to analyze and see what that looks like. So again, this is a regular budget reporting cycle. This budget proposal includes the governor's May revise proposal. He moved that forward to the legislature, and they might be enacting that budget or taking action this weekend, potentially. So that is ahead of schedule in Sacramento. So I'm going to start with the end. You've seen this slide many times. What's different is I'm going to start right here. This is the first time 2021-22 is brought into the picture. That is the new third year in our multi-year projection. I'll get to that later on. But we are going to start with 2018-19, the current year. This is, again, where we were in June, our operating deficits and our reserve levels at that time. Green is where we were at second interim. That is inclusive of all the additional parcel tax revenue, both the prorated and the full level in the multi-year projection. All the in-year budget reductions that were made, consolidation of administrative positions, reductions of site and department budgets, reduction of administrator days of work, also inclusive also the board approved 1.5% raises for our various employment groups that we've talked about tonight. I'm also going to talk about why has that budget reduction this year gone further down. That is a unique, peculiar item that I'm going to talk to. That's a positive development, but that's something where stylistically is something I'm going to bring new in terms of how I'm going to go about looking at budgets moving forward. So that's a different little piece. We're making adjustments this year sooner than maybe previous people in my office had done. So more to come on that. So estimated actuals. So again, in March, at the second interim, we projected that this year we'd have a $4.1 million operating deficit. Again, significantly better from where we were in June, but still significant in and of itself. The changes we're now reporting that will predict we'll close the year $750,000 roughly for the better, landing at $3.3 million. What are those changes on the next slide? We've had an increase in property tax revenue. Compared to what the Department of Finance at the county office projected. We had some various changes. Again, the salary increases for our classified staff that you have now approved this evening. We also had decreased. This is more of a stylistic change that I'm bringing forward into the office. We are looking a little bit more proactively midway through the year of where do we stand in our current expenditures. We budgeted certain amounts to departments, to sites, and we're looking actively and reaching out to them. Hey, given it's May, there's about a month and a half left of school, where do you actively think you're going to land? And we're making adjustments now. I think that's just a change, but I think it brings more timely, accurate information forward publicly. And also I think that timeliness allows us to maybe make more informed choices for budget development in the future. So that's something I hope to continue to do. So all those changes roughly add up to $450,000 for the better. So again, how does that affect our ending fund balance? Pretty much we were projecting that our reserve would end this school year at roughly $13.25 million. Given that $750,000 million increase, we're projecting our reserve will end up at roughly $14 million. Again, these are the estimated actuals. We'll see where we land up in September at the unaudited actuals when we close the books, clean up everything, clean up all the accounts. Before I move on to a budget proposal, are there any questions on the estimated actuals at this point? Okay. So moving forward, let's talk about next school year, our 2019-20 budget proposal. So again, at the beginning of the school year, we're projecting that next year's budget would be an $8.7 million deficit. In March, we had significant progress, and we're continuing to show a balanced budget of, well, a surplus of roughly $200,000, but effectively that's a balanced budget. That is inclusive of all the changes we've made this year, all the additional parcel tax revenue, all the additional fiscal advisory reductions that I'll talk more about in a moment. One thing I want to talk about, and I'm not going to read this to you, but in addition to the parcel tax revenue, over the past 2 years, the district has made $5.8 million of ongoing expenditure reductions. So that combination with the $5.1 million of additional parcel tax revenue, obviously combined together, being ongoing, largely explains the significant improvement of the district's financial condition. So while we're showing a projected balanced budget for next year, obviously we're still showing some operating deficits moving forward, primarily related to our enrollment growth. We have 2 more years of enrollment growth, and obviously pension costs are still increasing across the board. So let's get into some key budget assumptions. Every budget is very dependent on the assumptions used. We have our enrollment figures. Enrollment are the number of students in our system. And our ADA. ADA is the estimated actual daily attendance. Basically, how many of those students enrolled actually show up on a daily basis, a percentage. So that's always going to be slightly lower. We do, as Tara mentioned earlier, an unduplicated pupil percentage of 11%. That qualifies us for some additional dollars from the state in some areas, but we don't qualify in all the other areas because of our basic aid status relative to other districts in the state.
Can you briefly comment on the 100 extra students?
Sure. So that is something we're digging further into. Our enrollment projections that Dr. Tope's office had projected, in addition to the last board meeting where we had a professional demographer come in, those 2 projections were pretty much spot on for the next 5 years. But what we found out when we did staffing this spring and had incoming freshmen enroll, we had 100 freshmen that was higher than the increase we already projected. So that's something we're digging deeper into. I want to find out more about why. We've anecdotally identified that there were some private school 8th graders that have come to the district that maybe we weren't predicting in past years. We're also digging into just to make sure that all the students that are in our system are truly residents of the district and want to ensure that all of our residents are appropriately accessing our public schools.
I think that's what I was leading to. The first part of it, I think initially we had thought, or there was reported at a board meeting, that the surprise 100 were primarily from private schools.
Mm-hmm.
Have we confirmed that, or is that now not necessarily, or is that a fact or no, I guess?
That is a fact that the largest bulk of that is related to San Domenico. For example, we had a significant bump up in the number of incoming freshmen compared to previous years. But we're also, the more we're digging into it, into residency issues, the more we dig into it, the more we're getting more questions that we need to follow up on. So there's some more work to be done there that Wes Cedros and myself are looking into over the summer.
Okay, very good.
Sorry, if I could just add. So for the incoming freshmen, the anomaly this year is that we had both an increase in freshmen coming in from privates, higher than normal, and then more of our public feeder students, kids, staying with us. So that led to a more than 100% sort of survival level. And that's a bit of an anomaly. So normally the incoming from privates and the outgoing from publics tend to wash. This year they didn't. And so that's part of what we're trying to figure out.
And we're hoping that's an anomaly.
We're hoping so.
Yeah.
we'll find out more.
We'll know next
We'll know next year.
Yes, we will.
Yeah. Oh, I think they have-
But I think just to clarify, and that even with that extra 100, that's still having the 200,000 surplus for next year, just based on some efficiency.
Correct. Our budget projections.
Because it was going to be better than that. And is it, what, 18,000 per student about?
Ballpark, yep.
Okay.
Yes, Barbara?
Again, I don't know that I'm phrasing this properly, but who discusses the implications of potential recession that I think has been out there in discussion? You two might have some thoughts about that, but do we have to look back at 2007 and see what happened to our property tax figures and prepare? It's in there.
So if I go to the next slide,
Yeah,
which is
okay.
a lot of our key budget assumptions, one of our key drivers of revenue is obviously parcel tax and property tax revenue. Here is the estimated property tax increases of 5.21% this year, which were going to be higher than what was originally projected, but a slowing of the market, which is something that's not a surprise. So 4.14%, 4.08%, and ongoing. All those figures come directly from the Marin County Department of Finance. These were baked in, that we adjust accordingly. It's a highly sophisticated calculation that isn't simply a result of market value or sales. It's a lot of components, and they actually do a great deal of analysis for our Southern Marin, which were largely basic aid districts. So yes, that is baked into it.
Well, I think just to keep in mind, a 1% change, so if we were to go from 4% to 3%, that's $600,000 in terms of the impact there. And so even if the biggest issue would be a slowing of turnover, so if no property is sold at all, we'd see basically a 2% increase. The real issue that we saw in basically 08, 09, 2010 was the declining values and lower assessments based on that, but we're not in a scenario like that. And so even with much less turnover, we should see an increase. And so we'll probably be, even in a much slower climate, probably lowest level around 3.5% probably.
But one thing that the recession, if a recession comes, that could bring is further, is our enrollment growth doesn't drop off. We have more people choosing public schools. That's always a big swing in recessions.
Absolutely. Other key assumptions, I want to highlight the updated STRS and PERS rates. As we know, particularly the governor's proposed rates. That was exciting, got you excited, Lars. One thing that the governor's May revised budget proposal provided was a one-time reduction of our 2019-20 rates. So that 16.7% was, in the original proposal, going to be roughly a 1.4% higher than originally thought. That's a one-time reduction. It's not ongoing, but it's a one-time relief. Also, in 2021, that's at 18.1%. It was scheduled originally to be 19.1%. So those are both one-time, one-year reductions, relief, but it goes back to the original proposed rates. I have a couple other slides later on that topic. So other, again, key revenue assumptions, we talked about property tax revenue. We're expecting federal revenue to remain constant. State revenue would likely decrease outside of some specific block grants that Governor Brown's administration had proposed, the low performing student block grant and the CTE innovation grant. Those are kind of one-time monies, but that was kind of out the door with Governor Brown. Governor Newsom is expected to stop the annual kind of tradition of one-time revenues that Governor Brown's administration provided to school districts. So we're not, some school districts got kind of reliant on ongoing one-time money, if that makes sense, which is kind of an oxymoron. So we're expecting that to end with Governor Newsom's administration. And obviously, we are fully calculating and accepting the full annual revenue of the supplemental parcel tax measure passed in the fall, which roughly brings in $5.1 million annually. Again, as a reminder, as we talked about, both of those are original and supplemental parcel tax expire in June of 2022. We have, as we celebrate the last board meeting, our foundations have partnered with each other to really support the district, to provide one-time revenue for our athletic trainers, our instructional coaches, and to offset some of the graduation ceremony costs. So that is, their commitment was one time, not to say we can continue conversation, but we're budgeting with that as a one-time assumption. We've talked about this quite a bit, the difference between a basic aid and state-funded school district. Again, our property tax revenues exceed what our entitlement would be if we were a state-funded school district. The bottom line there, I want to highlight the TAM district is now $18 million over what our LCFF entitlement would be based on our enrollment. Again, we touched on this a little bit. Property tax revenue ebbs and flows. You can see quite a cyclical cycle. Barbara, that is the drop in property tax revenue you alluded to earlier on. It came back up, and this year went a little bit bump up higher than projected. But again, we're projecting it to the increase to decrease moving forward. This just shows what our parcel tax revenue is combined from the fall. That's nothing new there. Our general revenue, again, we're bringing with all sources. Again, property tax revenue is our primary general source revenue. Our state funding are those block grants I referenced a little bit earlier. Federal funding are the titles primarily. And local revenue, the primary driver of that are the parcel tax revenues and our foundations. Our foundations, we're blessed to have such community support and commitment to our schools. I'm going to skip that. Now on the expenditure side of things, what's different is we have, as we know, reduced the staffing across the board in our various groups. In our certificate group with our teachers and counselors, we are going to have 19.2 FTE less than we had this previous year, even with enrollment growth. That's primarily as a result of the partnership we've had with our TFT colleagues on a class size MOU to increase class sizes next year roughly by 2 students per class. Hence, therefore, we have less staff needed. We're also reducing our classified staff, 15.2 FTE. That's primarily driven from the fiscal advisory recommendation that was approved in February. And again, management, we have 2.3 less FTE. That's not backfilling Dr. Topier's former position, the combining of the Tamascal and Senior Director of Curriculum position, and sharing the Wellness Director's position, 0.25, with the County Office of Ed, and the Director of Nutrition and Director of Community Programs, each losing between 5 to 8 days next year in their work year. I did want to highlight that per our management contract ratios, we have a recommended staffing ratio that we have not added 1.5 FTE of assistant principals to our sites given the enrollment growth. I'd also want to highlight, we have now, as of tonight, settled with all employee groups through next school year. That is an extremely positive development. I think it's allowed us to have really productive conversations with all our groups about moving forward. Every employee is settled except for Dr. Topier. We also now, for all new employees hired, will have a health cap in effect. That is not something that will provide immediate relief, but that will, in time, provide ongoing relief and will accelerate at some point when there's a tipping point of retirements in the district. And again, we have some one-time relief in STIRS from the governor's budget, and the fiscal advisory expenditure reductions of $2.84 million is included and assumed ongoing. Just a quick reminder of this is nothing new, but this is the recommendation that Dr. Topier brought forward in February and that the board passed a resolution on. This is inclusive in the budget proposal this evening. Also,
you might want to clarify how that relates to the 5.8.
Yep. Absolutely.
If you could do that.
Absolutely. So that's great that you took the words out of my mouth. The $2.8 million that were reductions approved this spring, effective next school year, in addition to the next slide of roughly $3 million of previously approved ongoing expenditure reductions. 2016, the closure of the print shop. Last spring, via the fiscal advisory process of last year, the suspension of the teacher leader program, reduction of instructional coaching, reduction in hiring to hold tighter to contractual ratios, and the elimination of conferences, consultants, and travel. And then this fall, we also made those reductions and talked about not replace administrative positions or combining them, and reducing in-year district department and site budgets. So those two combined, Leslie, to your point, add up to the $5.8 million of ongoing reductions.
And just to remind us that that some of those, that while these cuts were necessary, and we did it to put our budget in a healthier place, that going forward, we may need to, in order to adequately serve our students, add back some of those positions, particularly the separating out the director of curriculum again, and perhaps the assistant superintendent of educational services. While we've been able to survive with those consolidations this year, that may not be optimal going forward.
Absolutely. You'll see once we get to the multi-year projection, again, all these are assumed ongoing except looking at a senior director position back in Ed Services, and also the reinstatement of a teacher leader program to provide the curriculum, instruction, leadership, and voice from the teachers. And then lastly, I just want to highlight, again, we offered the board offered a retirement incentive to our staff that allowed us to have do these reductions on both the classified and certificate side by many of those employees voluntarily choosing to retire to be incentivized to do so. That minimize and highly minimize the need to involuntarily reduce or lay off employees on the certificate side in particular. But part of that is we are owed the payments of those PARS retirement incentives that is paid to that group over the next 5 years. But again, even with that cost is a significant net savings to the district. And then lastly, I want to just highlight that statewide special ed costs have an annual rough increase of 10% annually. That is a challenge that all school districts are facing, and obviously there's a lot of advocacy both in Sacramento and Washington of how to fully fund that mandate so that districts have the appropriate resources to support all of our students. Enrollment growth, I'm not going to touch on that, but obviously we're 2 years away from peak enrollment. We've added over 1,200 students in the past 10 years. Again, that 1,200 students is about the size of another Drake High School on top of our district enrollment. This is a new slide. Again, in May, we had the demographer firm Decision Insight provide a very detailed enrollment projection that validated much of our internal enrollment, but obviously captured that the additional 100 freshmen that we had not identified. One piece I want to highlight is that while this is 2019-20, that's the figure we're budgeting off of. I do want to highlight that this current year's freshman class of 1,306 is the largest class we have had or are predicting to have. So you see that group begins to cycle through over the next 4 years, and then after that group graduates, we begin to see some more significant enrollment drops. So again, we're increasing next year, increasing the following year, pretty much the same. That's what I'm calling peak enrollment. And then when that freshman class cycles out, we begin to have some decreases in enrollment over time. This is a 10-year projection that just shows some similar trends. We begin to decrease over time, but I do want to highlight that our current kindergarten classes across all of our feeder districts has bumped back up. That is the first time in our internal studies we've seen that tick up. So the ongoing decline that we've seen stops right there. So I'm just kind of comparing where our enrollment will be in 10 years. Even after all that decline, we're still not far from where we were a couple of years ago.
And the number for next year is still, that doesn't include the extra 100, these numbers, correct?
Correct. This figure does not, but we have staff and our budget demonstrates that. We also need to think about not just district-wide enrollment, we need to think about site by site. This has facilities implications. So one thing you'll see is that Drake High School and Tam High School in the next 5 years begins to decline quicker. Redwood High School actually goes up slightly. So that's something we need to be mindful of in terms of space, classroom space. Again, another extreme benefit of the agreement on the class size MOU is that allows us to have a little bit more space facilities-wise that we didn't have prior to that. David Sondheim is very proficient in analyzing his master schedule and the implications on facilities, and we really agree to check back in this fall to see how this plays out and what his needs are in the ongoing future. But we do not have a need to bring portable classrooms back onto campuses yet, and that is a significant expense. So we want to prevent that, obviously, as long as we can. Again, these are the expenditures across all the typical object codes. Just a reminder, as my dear friend Lars always says, we're a people-based business. 87% of every dollar we spent go to people. We're a service-oriented industry. Just a visual of how that plays out. You'll see that our certificate salaries, we are in the business of teaching and learning. It makes sense that our teachers and our counselors be the largest slice of that pie. One thing I want to talk about is contributions to other restricted programs. Again, a restricted program is something where there's a funding resource that may only be used for restricted uses. One of the biggest ones, statewide, is our special ed. We have to contribute roughly $14 million to hold that, to make that balance. And we also are now required again by the state to make an ongoing contribution to our restricted maintenance account. That requirement went away for several years because of the statewide financial issues. We never reduced our contribution for that because we knew we had significant maintenance and enrollment growth. We had to create space for our students, so we never dropped below that. But that requirement is now an expectation statewide. And I do want to highlight that our foundations have contributed roughly $305,000 next year to support our athletic coaches, athletic trainers, our instructional coaches, and to offset our graduation expenses. I do have to highlight in a public manner our education protection account. Prop 30 several years ago was a support to school districts. Based on our enrollment and the dollar figure per ADA, the district expects to have EPA funding from the state of roughly $968,000. We're going to spend all of that in its intended purposes, instructional salaries, teacher salaries, counselor salaries, and their benefits. So this is my public disclosure to the community on that. So let's get back to STRS and PERS. This is a slide we've seen many times, but there's some updates here and some different colors to grab your attention. Obviously, pension reform in 2013 has dramatically changed the landscape. I did highlight already that the governors may provide some one-time STRS relief in 1920 and 2021. That's reflected in this budget. And that this is having a significant impact on our budget, roughly $4.1 million more in this proposed budget than compared to 2013-14. The cumulative cost of when the pension reform began and the current rates we have is roughly $5.8 million annually. That is significant. Obviously, when we've been adding staff for enrollment growth, compounded with the pension rate increases, that adds an additional significant expense. I do want to highlight that this increase, though, the last time you saw the slide, it was $6.7 million. Why has that gone down by roughly $900K? Two reasons. Obviously, the rate reductions, we have significantly less people compared to 1 year ago, this current year. So that combination itself is having a reduction of roughly $900K of what we were projecting 1 year ago. This is a visual that shows that same effect I was describing. You'll see that 1819 to 1920, that is much more comparable, but given the one-time reduction, but then it pops back up a little bit. So that just highlights what that one-time relief is. Again, the red line is what our projected costs were going to be prior to pension reform. So again, it roughly doubles the costs on both sides, STRS and PERS. Outside the general fund, which is where we do the bulk of the business, we do have other funds here. There's nothing I want to really highlight other than two pieces that are, again, based on the fiscal advisor expectations. Our cafeteria fund is going to be reducing its contribution from the general fund significantly based on some more efficient delivery of food, some reduction in staffing in our kitchens. So that there will be less of a contribution than there has been in previous years. And the expectation with the adult education fund, which includes our community ed program, is that there will be zero contribution next year. That had been an issue where we'd had contributions of $300,000 in previous years. Given the elimination of the transfer of our community ed program to the College of Marin, the budget submitted by that director shows a balanced budget, no contribution. Let me pause there for a second before I get into the multi-year projection. Barbara.
Question, but given what you said about what looks like a decline then over the 10-year period,
Enrollment.
does that, eliminate the discussion of any kind of a bond?
We haven't had that conversation. I think part of it won't be necessary for growth, but we have, sooner or later, we need to look at just continue ongoing upkeep of our facilities, our athletic fields, our classrooms, technology needs. But right now, there would be no need for that. We need to be focused on our balance, our general fund, and our operating expenditures.
No arguing about that, but just as a heads up, and I'll be gone by then, but, at what
Don't be so sure.
point, believe me, at what point then, you say eventually, when, or what might be looking at, when is eventually? If we've got a 10-year projection here,
When is eventually,
in terms of discussing the potential for a need for a bond.
I think we're 4 to 6 years out at
4 to
least
6?
for that,
Okay.
yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions before I discuss the multi-year projection? Okay. All right. So again, we talked about our more defined budget for the 2019-20 school year. Now let's talk about the additional 2 years, the subsequent years in the multi-year projection. So again, we got to start with assumptions. The same local property tax revenue growth as discussed before. Nothing's changed on the federal, state, or local level. We've talked about how enrollment continues to increase by a cumulative impact of 79 students. Based on our class size MAU, we're projecting the 2021 school year that we'll need to hire 0.6 FTE. That is significantly less than we were projecting prior to the class size MAU. That 0.6 is defined by, while we do need to hire 3.7 FTE for growth, we'll be having the expiration of our release periods for our science teachers for the next gen Common Core, so that will rotate out. Also, as we know, per the terms of our class size MAU, we're phasing in the increases to our English department. So we're hopefully through attrition, we'll be reducing district-wide 2 FTE in our English department next year. The following year, we're projecting to have a net decrease of 1.2 FTE. Zero growth, we're at peak enrollment at that point, but again, another 2-year phase-in of the same class size MAU per the English department. Again, we hope to handle that through attrition, those that resign, move elsewhere, or retire. Again, the fiscal advisor expenditure reductions are ongoing. They're included, but we show in the multi-projection a reinstatement of, as we discussed, the Senior Director of Curriculum Instruction and a teacher leader model to provide that curriculum instruction guidance and leadership from our teachers, our counselors, and from our Ed Services Department to supplement what Dr. Topier is continuing to do. I do want to highlight again that all employee groups have settled in compensation through next year. That is a great place to be. We're bargaining forward. To have some cost certainty at that level is enormous. It allows us to plan more precisely, thinking years out, not in just the immediate. But I do want to highlight that the total cost of a 1% raise in 2020-21 is projected to be $581,000 for all employees together, just for getting a frame of reference. Again, I've talked on all new employees will have a health cap. We've talked about the PARS payments, especially costs. Utilities. There's been a lot of public conversation about Marin Municipal Water District fees. They are moving forward with a 4% increase for us that will phase in over time. So we are budgeting for that in all utilities, a 4% annual increase for all utilities. This is the multi-year projection that just shows exactly what I was talking about. You cannot read that, but for our 3 fiscal years, here's our slight operating surplus next year, basically a balanced budget, moving towards again, an operating deficit next year, inclusive of enrollment growth, pension increases, and the reinstatement of our Senior Director of Curriculum and a teacher leader model. And again, a slight operating deficit in the 3rd year of roughly $529K. That's a small number.
Corbett, can you go back a slide, please?
This slide?
Yes, I'm looking for it's for the special ed costs, 10% annually. Can you explain a little bit more I know that we discussed this last year at this time, and as I recall, we assumed, I want to say we did assume 10 or 15% in this current year, but the thought at that time was that that was maybe overly conservative for the out years. I don't remember the details, but is this what you've seen looking, or every year you've seen an incremental 10%?
We did
increase
some longitudinal analysis of over the past 10 years.
Okay,
What has
thank
been
you.
the annual increase? Some higher, some lower, but roughly it's been an
Okay,
annual
thank you.
10% increase.
Okay.
Obviously, we're trying to do what we can to bend that increase and still provide amazing services to our students. And there's some efforts in place that might
Is that,
possibly, but we're assuming a 10% increase for now.
and is that normalized to enrollment growth? Or is this independent of enrollment growth, or is this related to enrollment growth?
Part of it is related to enrollment growth as well. It's not normalized to take that variable out.
It might be interesting to look at it normalized. I'm just curious if.
That's a good point.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And does the gap, because traditionally we don't receive the revenue that is necessary to cover special ed costs, correct? And so is that gap growing?
Yes. It's pretty
So it'd be useful to have that information at some point, whether it's now or ongoing budget discussions, but to see what that gap is on what's funded and then what we have to go into the general fund for.
Yeah, we estimate that this year we were funded at about 8%.
8%?
At 8%, as compared to what the government had promised way back when, which was 40%.
Barbara, per JLAC work, one of their efforts is to communicate what our district's special ed costs. So that was something I know that is a conversation point there. These are just the notes that I've talked on in the multi-year projection. The font's too small. So let's talk about our reserves, our ending fund balance. We need to disclose how we are assigning that. Again, we're estimating our total general fund ending fund balance will be $14.6 million. A few of that is just non-spendable cash, revolving cash, some restricted pieces. The largest bulk of that is $9 million in assignments. How are we assigning that $9 million, which we have to publicly disclose? We're assigning parts of that to offset those operating deficits we just talked about. We're predicting, given the next gen science standards, that we're going to have to adopt some curriculum materials, and textbooks are not getting cheaper. So we need to, and that we now have a 3-year science graduation requirement, which is an increase from before. So there's going to be some curriculum purchases there. We're still potentially, while we hope not to, we still feel like it's prudent to have some assignments for temporary student housing, potentially at Redwood High School, if that needs surmises.
Can I ask you, is that the term housing?
Yes.
Is there a way to use another term?
I can use portable classrooms.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, housing unit sounds like we're housing families.
Yeah. Yeah, the student housing is just another jargon,
Right.
but I will change that. It is misleading. We're not housing.
Did we scare you that we were now going to start building housing on our campuses?
We will change that moving
We're
forward.
going to take that on too right now?
Fund 40 capital outlay. We just have some significant large facilities projects, permanent athletic fields. Those synthetic fields do have a lifespan. We're planning on a 10-year horizon for them. Our pools that were supported by the last bond measures, we have some larger lamination work we need to do. So we just want to plan for that and make sure Fund 40, our capital facilities projects, is now self-sufficient. There's always going to be some need to keep our information technology systems and maintenance up to speed and modernized, given the demands and increasing demands our systems are putting on that. And we do, we'll have, per our board policy, some additional reserves of roughly $5 million. That is above the minimum requirement reserve for economic uncertainty. The minimum reserve for economic uncertainty is what's called unassigned. That's 3%. That's state law. That is the floor, the statutory floor, not recommended, but statutory floor, given the size of our district is 3% of our expenditures, which relates to $2.4 million. And we have unassigned roughly $2.3 million. So all those add up to our estimated ending fund balance. That's also supported by the reserve disclosure that was in the agenda item. So again, back to the big picture. We talked about how this year, this current year, we knew we'd be deficit spending, about $750K less than we thought. That difference helps bump up our starting fund balance for next year. Next year, we're projecting a balanced budget and in the multi-year projection, moving back towards some deficit spending. So uncertainties and prudence just highlights things to take away, a lot of data. What do you want to walk away? What are the things I want to leave in your mind as we move forward? Again, as we talked about, our enrollment growth for the freshman level was 100 students higher. We're going to dig into that. We have a lot of questions about that. We need to learn more about that. We still have projected enrollment increases for 2 more years, and that's almost a 2-year peak or plateau. As we talked about also, eventually the economy will soften. We've had one of the longest periods of economic expansion in California history, and we're already seeing beginning the slowdown of those increases we've had. New governor, we're not going to be projecting ongoing one-time revenue sources. STIRS and PERS is still increasing. Special ed, we talked about that. And again, all of the $5.8 million of expenditure reductions from this year, the $2.84 million, the $3 million from years prior, all of those are assumed ongoing, with the exception of the Senior Director of Curriculum Instruction and bringing back a teacher leader model. We have a 3-year class as MOU that kicks in next year that has dramatically improved our financial situation. And obviously both parcel taxes, as we talked about repeatedly, both expire together in June of 2022. So again, the current multi-year projection shows a balanced budget in 1920, but we still have some downward budgetary pressure, showing a return to some deficit spending, albeit at a much smaller level, but still deficit spending into the future. So just key budget calendar dates. I'll be back later this month to propose for budget adoption. We'll see if there's any changes in what the legislature enacts this weekend. We're not expecting any, but you never know. And in September, we'll be back to bring the final accounting for the 18-19 school year, the unaudited actuals. I don't expect that to be as dramatic of a change as maybe previous years because of the estimated actuals work we've done this year. I do want to give a shout out to 2 individuals in my office. That change of practice requires a significant increase of labor. So I want to call out my colleague Ray Diacchino, Director of Fiscal Services, and our accounting coordinator, Frank Cardinale, who did a nothing short of a spectacular job in not only doing that and bringing forward and working as a team. So I want to call them out and thank you, Ray. And acknowledge Frank Cardinale as well.
Yay, Ray.
He's going to save it for public comment. And again, I'll be back in December giving our first interim report on the upcoming school year. So in their proposal, per AB 1200 state law, we have to, I'm projecting that the district will be able to meet all of its financial obligations for the current fiscal year, meaning 1920, and the 2 subsequent years. So the district would be recommending a self-certification of a positive certification, which is the place to be. Also, we want to talk about some potential parcel tax renewal timelines. Obviously, at the last board meeting, if you work from your bottom up, we had an informational presentation by the firm TBWB. I think I got the acronym right, Tara. I did. They provide some information to the public and the board on processes and best practices for parcel tax timelines and guidelines. That firm, jumping to the end, recommended at the earliest that the district could consider a potential new parcel tax in March 3rd, 2020. That's not far away, but there's also some obviously intermediary steps to consider. Obviously, the proposal that's being considered tonight, if we wanted to do some polling over the summer to get a feeling from our community what their goals are, their priorities and comfort level. We're talking about how doing some communication to inform the community tonight and May 28th that we're considering that, to get their thoughts on that, to make them aware of it. We'll do some communication again in August when people come back from summer, both in a mailer that goes out, informing them that we're the state of the district and what we're considering, and also we're also considering a mailer. I don't think we have it here, but a June mailer as well. So a lot of potential steps to be considered. Again, this is just a potential timeline that can be adjusted, but this is the best practice based on a potential March 3rd timeline. I'm going to purposely skip that for a moment, and then we'll come back to it. I already did my thank you to Ray and Frank, so actually, I'm done.
And this is if we agree to go ahead with the parcel tax, so that's the first step.
That's exactly. Yeah. That's hence the potential piece. Yes, Barbara.
Without parcel, well, don't want to go there, but is there any plan or projection for when we'll be able to start putting back money in the reserve? It's pretty well dependent then on the passage of a new parcel tax to be able to do that?
So the first step we need to do is stop deficit spending. I think we're going to have a balanced budget next year. Some deficit spending in the out years, way better than we were showing in June. But that's the first step, is you can't really bring a reserve back up to a healthy level until you stop deficit spending. So I think we're pretty much there. We're not completely there. There's still work to be done, but again, a much better place. And then it comes back to where it's the board's comfort level. What a reserve is not something, I don't think, we have a board policy and a target reserve level of 17%. We're below that. But we're way better than we were showing in June. So first step, stop deficit spending. Where do we want to go with that? It's really the pleasure of the board of what's your comfort level for risk. The reason why we had time to make adjustments now is because the previous board had a higher reserve level. That's really dependent on where the board wants to go with that.
I have kind of a big picture question that may not be able to be answered tonight, but maybe as we move forward. We heard the LCAP presentation tonight and some of the dashboard data, as well as some of the Healthy Kids Survey. And we look ahead of where would the next level of reductions come from, knowing where we are as a district and what the community wants in terms of, we keep going back to the LCAP, so there's that. But we have spoken tonight, and I know we've talked about it before, because we can see how difficult it is with the curriculum position not being backfilled, as well as, what was the other one? Teacher leader program. And that we're feeling the crunch there. So I think what would be helpful for the board is, it's something that we're aware of, but if that's included in any discussion too, to tie it back. Just, like we look at data, and data, sometimes it's qualitative. Sometimes we have to look at things qualitatively based on your expertise. And why those two things, and we feel it, I definitely feel it, but I think it would also help the community understand a little bit as well. So it's just a thought maybe as we move forward.
One thing that I guess that partially adds to that is what you're seeing. We're actually living in 4 fiscal years right now. And we're still living this current school year, and now we're proposing a budget for next year and the 2 subsequent years. And that is the legal minimum, but I don't think that's good enough. I think we need to be projecting further out at a much more refined, granular level. So yes, we've been working hard to do this. This is a significant amount of work, but it's at a granular level. I want to we are doing and have done a granular level moving out beyond these 2 years. What does it look like in years 3 and 4? What does it look like? We're modeling out. What if property tax levels come in slightly above or below? What if our enrollment comes in slightly above or below? What impact does that have on staffing? What does it mean if we want to, again, continue to attract amazing quality teachers given the cost of living by giving them a reasonable cost of living adjustment? So those are things, what does it look like if the class is MAU, something we want to continue thinking about extending or extending that conversation with our TFT colleagues. All those different variables, we don't have complete control of them, but I think it's wise for us to look at that. Now that we're getting to more of a balanced budget situation, we need to start thinking forward thinking beyond 3 years, 5 years, and really having that granular analysis so that we have informed decisions to make responsible decisions.
I think, but not to get away from what Leslie was saying, right, which is that we've heard tonight, and you've included in some of your budget projections, adding back the teacher leadership program, the additional cost for that, and then adding back the curriculum instructor or position as well. And so it's not all the what ifs and what ifs, because we can take those out and say, okay, without the $1.2 million, that's, whatever that costs, we're $1.2 million better. But to keep that narrative in there and the justification for why those are ending up in your proposed budgets, that's different than the granular look. right? That's the narrative for justifying additional costs. Is that what you were?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we've been living this, so
Yes.
I, in my gut, see the value. I see the need, but I don't think the general population may see it. And for me to eventually make a vote, I need a little bit more evidence in front of me, described. That's all.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think I have maintained I've maintained not half, but all of my duties from Ed Services. And luckily I have an amazing team around me that has allowed me to do that. It's fair to say that it has been absolute crazy making at times. And, again, thank God I have Mary and people around me to, there's days where I'm like, I don't know what day of the week it is. What day of the week is it right now? And without, we are a learning institution, and we are, what we have found through LCAP is that our community really, really values the robust course catalog. The fact that we have kids who can take biomedical science and a wide array of science electives and art electives and music electives, and that there's just this really rich experience, and that needs to be curated. And right now we have nobody that can full-time curate that, right? There's nobody, and all of this requires work, making sure that our courses of study are up to date, that they have the required state standards in them, that we are working collaboratively through teachers to ensure that the implementation of those programs is to fidelity, is take somebody full-time, right? And Dr. Stifler and I are both splitting our time between Ed Services and something else. And for me, the something else is a superintendency, which has some pulls on it. And for me, for example, I'm also our AVID district director, that's the, in some school districts, that's a full-time job in and of itself. So I think, to your point, and I think you're right, we're living it, so we're like, but I do think it's important for us to continue to remind our community that is the sort of the steam engine that keeps a quality school district going.
Well, the other thing that can happen, and knock on wood, it's not happening now, but when you have a system that's functioning, very high functioning, and somebody has to wear a double hat, it's not sustainable. And because it started out so strong, you don't see the cracks. And then all of a sudden you do. And then you've got a big problem on your hands. And I don't want us to get to that point. And also just witnessing just in the last month or 6 weeks what the district has gone through and what I've seen you have to do as a superintendent. I am really concerned about that, but I'm also concerned about how we get that across the community. So thank you. We'll have to get more of this on paper. So thank you. It's very helpful. Any questions, comments? There's no action for this. This is informational. I suppose a follow-on information about and this could be something not now because it's just coming to me, but, we just talked about getting more information about the add-ins. If looking at the LCAP and the priorities of our community, what would we take out? What would you recommend we remove that has the least impact on the desires of the community and the welfare of our students? What would that look like? So.
I can certainly look into that.
I can tell you now that further cuts would look like less course offerings, less elective offerings.
Right.
It would have to be.
And I think,
That would be
Cynthia, you once said 6 periods.
Yeah, it would be. That would be.
And so we've hit that point where it's more of a drastic.
Yeah. I mean,
Thank you for ascribing that to me.
Well, I found that very helpful at that one meeting.
Yeah, I think, it would look like kids being limited in a way that we haven't limited them before. Which sounds like it's not a big deal, but it would drastically change the offerings the district could provide for our students.
And then there's the pull with the psychological welfare of our students and the pull there.
All
You know,
the
we all
support
care about
services.
that, right? And we're learning more and more about that, how we need that, so.
It's fair to say this has been a very, the amount of discussion with our community, our staff, our students, to try to find the right balancing act with the fiscal advisory reductions, given just the resource scarcity we have. We heard loud and clear, as Dr. Tubby mentioned, that our community spoke about in their LCAP survey that broad elective offerings, program offerings was their number one priority. So I think this budget reflects that. But as a result of that, a lot of other areas we had to look at and make the reductions there. So I think it's fair to say what we have here is a balance point that honors the community's feedback, but there's not much else to go without having significant impacts without touching instructional programming, elective programming. And again, this is all done as projecting what that will be for next school year. We're going to be feeling how that's implemented this fall. And there'll be some areas that there'll be maybe some more impact than we projected, maybe some less. We'll have to assess the impact of these reductions moving forward and adjust accordingly.
Thank you. A lot to think about, and makes me want to thank the Fiscal Advisory Committee all over again, because I get a taste of how much analysis goes into this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know what I'd do without that, but I really appreciate you reminding me I get focused. Do we have any public comment on, I'm looking for the exact title, but what we just discussed at the proposed budget and related reserve levels?
Good evening. Mimi Willard from Kentfield. So the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers supported Measure J, which we felt very good about. And there was an urgency there, and also there was a sense that our support was intended to give new management, new board, an opportunity to see what they could do. Certainly, also entering into our consideration was that there were some expense reductions being made and consolidations. What we hoped would be a commitment to end deficit spending, and some high hopes that there would be a reserve rebuild from the parcel tax. So at this juncture, just want to say that I have a little bit of concern here about adding back positions and cost at this particular moment. You've got not too many FTEs, a few FTEs. You do have the curriculum director. I understand why you would want to do that, but it is a reversal. Teacher leader, ditto there. There was the share of the parcel tax with the employees. And I think
no. Anyway, go ahead. I'll let you go
okay,
ahead. Sorry.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to lose my 3 minutes to
I'm
that.
sorry.
And I think very importantly, I'm concerned about the fact that for obvious reasons, there isn't a contract projection in your future budget, but there's probably an expectation that if the parcel tax goes through, that's going to be in there as well, and that's going to change all those out-year numbers starting in fiscal 2021. So I think there are some stressors here on the horizon. I understand that the county gave you their numbers and that they have some, good ability to project, but I'm honestly pretty skeptical that you're going to be getting 4% a year in parcel tax. I would certainly like to see some better reserving against that possibility that number turns out to be lower, given what's happening in the real estate market. I'm concerned about a $1 million deficit in 2021, even before we deal with out-year compensation growth, which isn't really in the out 2 years of your multi-year projection. Meanwhile, we've got the parcel tax coming. It's going to sunset, and that's a cliffhanger. So I would really like you to be a little bit more conservative coming into that. I mean, what happens if it goes down? Obviously, you can't cover the whole shortfall, but it would be nice to be in a better, stronger position. I have to tell you also, I'm a little bit concerned about your having hired TBWB in that they used what many people in the community perceived to be aggressive tactics that were very divisive in the Kentfield parcel tax. And I will also mention that dual hire by both the foundation and the district could be problematic. And finally, I think that you need to tread cautiously about, there's a little bit of mumbling out there, not locally, but on the statewide level, about taxpayer money being spent on polling and mailers. So be very careful about that. So those are just some things to be thinking about, but I hope that you will be conservative in what you do from here. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comment?
Did you want to clarify the parcel tax to teachers?
Right. Will you go ahead? You're talking.
So the contract specifications were if the increase in property taxes came in above what was projected, that would be split with the teachers. So it wasn't related to the parcel tax, but the property tax.
Yeah. And there may be a few other clarifications, but
Yeah, I think that there was some conflation of parcel tax and property tax, the property tax being at 4%, not the parcel tax.
Correct.
Yeah.
But thank you.
If I misspoke, I apologize. I definitely meant the property tax.
Yeah, okay. Any other discussion before we move on? Okay. And I believe the next item is take action on the TBWB contract for political consulting services.
Yep. So, I mean, Corbett kind of did the pre-work already. You saw the potential timeline, and so this is for exploration. We knew when we did the last parcel tax that it was a short-term measure, and that we would be turning around fairly shortly to have to renew that. It sunsets in both of those parcel tax sunset in June of 2020, and in doing some analysis, the best election for the ballot that came forward was sooner than we had thought it would be, and that is the March 3rd, 2020, which is a primary, which is a major election. And so for those reasons, we wanted to provide the board an opportunity to be as prepared as possible to make a decision. And not miss an opportunity, and then potentially be in a position where we have very few options in front of us and a sunsetting of quite a bit of our income. So this contract is to explore what that would look like for a 2020 ballot, and as Corbett said, provide some polling and information from our community as well.
Any questions?
I think it's good to look at it in the near term, and that they expire in 2022, and clearly you don't want to wait until that time, given that it's more than a sixth of the revenue for the district. So it's good to look at it quickly or early.
And I agree with looking at it early, and I way back in Kentfield with a prior parcel tax, I was more skeptical about polling information, but I've been convinced that it's extraordinarily important to get a sense of what the community is thinking, what they value, and at what amount do they value it. So I think this is important information.
Yeah, to echo that, the feedback, we're in a position where we're not only looking at potential, renewal, we are looking at what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Where would we go now? We've made so many cuts, and where would the next steps be? And we've gotten a lot of information about that, including the survey you did in the fall. But that's another nice thing about polling, regardless of what we decide about when to renew the parcel tax or what it looks like, we'll get some information about what the greater community values, not just the parent community. So I really like the polling for that, if nothing else.
Barbara, anything?
Do you have anything to add, Barbara? Okay. Are you going to vote from over there? Do you want to just bring in a microphone? So do we have any public comment on this? I know we heard one mention before.
Yes, Laura Effel again. I was dismayed to learn that this was the firm you had selected. I don't live in Kentfield, but I did follow the, I think it was February 2018 election in Kentfield for their parcel tax. And knowing that I was going to be here tonight, I looked back at the IJ to see some of the articles about that particular ballot. And it was said in more than one place that the materials provided by the district to the voters contained information that said something along the lines that none of the parcel tax would be spent on pensions. Now, we all know that money is fungible, and to the extent that pensions were increasing their costs somewhere in the district's budget, you couldn't really say that pensions didn't have anything to do with this parcel tax. And some people thought it was just a little misleading. Some people thought it was an out-and-out lie. That's why I'm so concerned that this is who you have selected. But I don't suspect any of you that I know to be dishonest about things, about this or anything else. But I do hope that all of you will be vigilant for anything that looks like deceptive practices. And I think you'll do the district a great service to be vigilant about that and make sure it doesn't happen in this district. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, this contract is not for the parcel tax. It's for an exploration, and the district does pay for that. It's for an exploration of what our options are and some polling. Once the district, when the district decides to move forward for renewing the parcel tax, whatever that looks like, the district does not pay a dime to any consultant at that point. That's when there's an iron wall, and the community-based group raises their own funding for whatever consultant they choose. We have nothing to do with that. But and that's across the board. I'm sure it was that way with Kentfield. And the district does do due diligence with doing fact checks, and so I do appreciate that comment. But thank you. So now I'd like to ask if there's a motion to take action on the TBWB contract for political consulting services.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That passed. Okay, update on legislative actions.
Did Corbett steal the clicker? Did Corbett steal the clicker? Thank you. So I just wanted, there's been, one of my favorite quotes that I read lately was a flurry of activity out of the committees. And it did feel like a flurry, like, so a few weeks ago, or I don't know, 10 months ago, I can't even remember now when that was, but we looked at some legislation that could impact our district. So I just wanted to give you an update of where we were on some of it. Just a reminder that these were some of the bills that we talked about last time. And I also just put in, there's been a lot of charter school reform going on and conversation, which is interesting. And you never know when that could impact you. So the Portantino bill, as it's known, or the late start, has moved forward. It's interesting, they did make an amendment, as you can see here, to allow middle schools to start at 8, but to continue to insist that high schools start at 8:30. I don't know. I don't know why the research supports high schoolers starting at 8:30, but doesn't support middle schoolers starting at 8:30. So that was an interesting, I think my gut would be that was a response to districts saying, we stack our busing. We can't, like, you're now pushing our elementary kids into like the 11 a.m. start time, and also some general worry about general congestion and traffic, and that you're now adding a lot of that school start traffic. So this was a change. Anyway, it's moving forward. It has a lot of support, not from educators, funny enough, which is really interesting. This, when you look at the list of people who are not supporting this, it is by and large school boards, the California Teachers Association, a whole list of educators, people in the field say, please don't do this, and openly say, just allow us to be the ones to make that decision that's best for our district. Nobody's disputing that it's good. It's just about putting one more thing on us that is going to be a fiscal burden without considering that.
What was the exception for non-rural? I mean, or why do
Busing.
rural high schools? Busing?
Busing.
Okay.
And length of the time of busing. And unfortunately, our own senator voted for it after meeting with us and saying he wouldn't. I know, right? I mean, Barbara and I
We
sat in the
cracked
same
that joke
JLAC.
at that meeting, too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I don't mind saying publicly that his own aide was misinformed and said, no, he voted against it. And we said, no, he voted for it. So we got an email saying that he was moved by the research. I think it's also important to note that much of the research that this bill is predicated on compares a 7:30 start time, not an 8 a.m. start time, to an 8:30 start time. So, there's some flaws in the research also. Anyway, and we've talked about this, there's other things. So this is moving forward. I would not be surprised if this doesn't pass. I think this is going to pass.
Any sense, because it already passed once and Brown
Right.
vetoed it, so where does Newsom stand on it?
We don't know yet.
Yeah.
Barbara, do you have any better sense from that? No, and that's sort of the big question mark, is where is he going to fall on local control? Right. Right.
And how do we get to Newsom?
He's in Sacramento.
Oh, thank you.
He's...
No, I think we need some
Right.
advice and really get on this and not sit back and see what happens.
This has been something that JLAC and the delegates have been, this is a drum they've been beating loudly. But I have to say, it felt like the superintendents all met with McGuire also and spoke to this very adamantly. And, it's one of those things where you sit there and then you hear the vote and you're like, oh, okay. So thanks for wasting that hour. That was great. But so that was, I think it'll come down to whether or not Newsom's going to veto it or not. And we don't know. We don't really have an indication. And I don't think any of our legislative analysts, do either. Yeah, they're kind of, this is all sort of belt, right? They're going to get their grounding with him in this sort of round. So we'll see what this looks like moving forward. So yeah, 8:30 start times.
So if it allows 0 period classes to be offered prior to 8:30 a.m., why wouldn't we just schedule the first period as 0 period?
They can't be
Core classes?
Yeah, they can't be core.
We've got electives.
I can't remember the exact wording. I'll look it up. But there's something about, they have language in there about what can be in those. But yeah, you could.
Right, but you could flip your schedule. I mean,
Sure.
right? Because if sometimes, and it doesn't work that across all of high
Yeah.
school, but
A lot of our kids already.
there's flexibility within there to
Yeah.
structure
Yes.
non-core classes.
Right. So there's that. So here's just the status. Oh, look, there it was. We're not clear on his stance. Sorry, I was a slide behind. So the pathways to college is what I think this bill is dubbed. This has strong support also. This is the one that would allow us to administer the SAT rather than the CASP, and for the reasons that we talked about tonight, there's a lot of support. Also because we feel like a lot of people feel like it would even the playing field as far as admittance, required testing. So this is where, from our analysts, where we were with this one. So first read in the Senate, likely to pass. This one does not seem to have very much opposition at all, that I recall.
Was there any discussion because yes, I mean, there's equity issues, all of that, right? And maybe kids are more vested in taking the SAT or the ACT. But one of the purported bonuses of the CASP test is it's adaptive as it goes. And so it better tests the skills than the SAT or the ACT.
Right.
So was there any discussion about the educational purpose of the test and then how we use it to inform teaching? Because we won't really use the SAT test results to inform teaching.
There's been some of that, and about, potentially better aligning the SAT, to have matching purposes, because exactly like the SAT was not designed to be this kind of assessment. But there has been some discussion around that. And I think, as we shared before, there's some people that don't love College Board and that this money would go to College Board. But it goes to it's like, whose money? Like, most kids take it anyway, so that money goes to College Board regardless.
But this also just allows districts to do it, doesn't require, correct?
Absolutely. It allows you to.
Right. I think that one concern would be that if districts implement it, that every student has a different timeline in terms of when they want to take the SAT. So what attendance would we end up having, or any district end up having on that one day, whereas CASP right now, people show up, generally.
Right, yeah. I think most people would opt to take it because it would be free, right? They'd be administered, right? They wouldn't have to take it on a Saturday morning. They'd get to take it during school, and it would be paid for.
Right, it's not...
What if students had already taken the test?
Yeah, I don't know those details, and I hear what you're saying, because you're also saying, like, if I don't feel ready to take the SAT, then I may not want to take it. I mean, you can take it again, right? But there may be some of those, and there's some concern that this won't equalize at all, that wealthy districts will administer the SAT, and districts that can't afford it won't, and it really won't serve the purpose it's meant to, right? That it won't actually increase the number of kids who have access to the SAT. It certainly has its issues. Yeah, right. There is.
There's a lot of student support, though.
There's a lot of student support, and fee waiver is one piece of it. It's also getting there. There's a lot of pieces that go into it, and I think just having it be like part of your school day does decrease an access and barrier issue, right? But so again, we'll continue to watch this, and again, this is a choice. So unlike the 8:30 start time. So the Hill Amendment has been placed in inactive for now. It doesn't take much to take it out of the inactive, but just a few things on this is, our understanding is, because it would have likely been on the November 2020 ballot, and there is the split roll, they didn't want both of these things on the same ballot. And so they made a choice. So the Prop 13, the split roll is what they opted for. So, and I don't think this amendment would pass, personally. I don't think there would be broad support across the state to reduce the ability to tax homeowners from 66.6% down to 55%. And so then there's the charter reform, which I don't know if any of you have been reading these, but it's for me, I was like, I got to start over. Wait a minute, what? But there's been a lot of issues with charters, which I won't dive into too deeply. But there's sort of a cascading series of bills that are going on, and essentially, there's a group that are trying to limit the overall number of charters that can be issued, limit the authority of charter petitions to be able to move up a chain of command, and then have a district be overruled by an outside entity. So there was a committee. The superintendent of public education has a charter committee that was sort of looking at data and gathering information and supposed to give some feedback on the issue of charters. So this is where these are. I think it's interesting just to watch. Charters are kind of fraught. For me, I understand the history and why they came about. I'm also a believer that if there is a system that works better, then change the system for all. But I don't know that allowing certain groups to operate outside a system, some of these laws are like, can they at least follow the Brown Act? Things like that. So I think we could come out of this with a better system, hopefully, would be the hope. A more transparent system, and fewer loopholes that people have been allowed to exploit for financial gain, a la former Marin City superintendent. So yeah, that's the charter reform. So we're going to continue to watch those. Those are just the updates right now. Barbara, do you have anything to add from JLAC? I mean, we haven't had JLAC. We're done, but
Nothing to add, but
or for the
I would say that at the CSBA Delegate Assembly, all the work that you did to provide me with some data, thank you, Amira and Corbett, and
on special education.
Yes, special education. We covered that in smaller sessions and breakout sessions. I was encouraged by the fact that virtually every county that in the room that I was in was reporting on the same issues and significantly the same percentage and the impacts on their school district. It was I was surprised to hear that we were all of us so much impacted by this increase that is runaway. And the runaway part is crazy making because you cannot plan, let alone be accountable for it. So we'll see what they're going to do. CSBA did produce a document that is a basic document available about special education per se. So they've done some good work just doing a SPED basics. I have two of them in pamphlet form. So that's helpful as a basis. So I think we're going to be looking at to see what they're going to come up with next then in terms of pressuring for legislation and the governor to help us with this, because, and the feds.
Yeah.
The National School Boards Association, our California folks did some heavy lifting in Washington, but nobody paid attention.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's, and this is one of those areas where all districts need relief. Right now there's some proposed relief for districts with high numbers of low socioeconomic and high special ed, but they need to provide it. I think to say that it's okay for basic aid districts to continue to have this, double-digit increase every year and not be provided to some relief. So that's definitely, clear on our radar. Thank you. Kevin, do you have a question? Okay. Thanks. Okay, and then we have our field trips. Oh, public comment?
A definite
We
no
have a
from there.
spirit in the room. That's some public comment.
Yeah. First reading of administrative regulations, sponsored field trips.
Right. Thank you. So this is a first reading of a proposed change to AR 6153. I'm not going to read it back to you, but I want to give you a little bit of a nexus of this. Obviously, field trips is a very important part of our instructional program. Obviously, is another additional area where we have to make sure we're providing appropriate supervision. So Brian Zalian, who is a French teacher at Tam High School, also our Global Studies district-wide coordinator, works very closely with Dr. Tope and many of her hats over the previous years to really work to provide and expand these offerings around the world to all of our students district-wide. But obviously, these trips have an expense that come with that. Obviously, the trips pay for appropriate staff supervision. Certificate staff primarily are those that go along. And our current board policy requires a supervision ratio of 10 students per every adult supervisor. The nexus of this is that we want to expand and continue to provide access to these global studies trips. And Dr. Tobe and Brian's conversation would be for the global studies trips only, having a caveat where we'd change that ratio from 10 to 1 to 12 to 1. The thinking being many of the trips often are in the low 20s for the number of students that go. Not all, but many of them are. And once you get above 20, that necessitates, in our current policy, that necessitates a third adult supervisor, which obviously ratchets up the costs to pay for the supervision significantly. So that's the premise behind that. In consulting with Keenan, our insurance provider, as long as our policy, we abide by our policy, there would be no cost increase to our insurance rates. So we don't have an expanded liability there. So,
Can I add one more thing too? Almost all of our global studies trips, the students are housed with families. So there's only a few in which they're not, and those are in which they're not, they have additional adult guides with them. But by and large, and this would only be for trips that are organized within the Global Studies program and follow the Global Studies program protocol.
So currently we pay, because we've seen these permission slips come through or proposals for these trips, and I'd ask questions about who funds students who can't afford to go on the trips, and that's funded by the foundations, right? So the district doesn't pay for those.
Correct.
So why aren't these trips totally self-sustaining i.e. the people going on the trip should pay for the chaperones as opposed to the district?
They are. What we're saying is by having to add that third chaperone when you hit 21 kids, it ups the cost to the students.
Oh, okay, so it's to the students, it's not to the district?
Not to the district, it's to the students.
Okay.
The students then have to cover the cost.
And we're, in light of some other things, we're not concerned about lack of oversight by having a higher student to chaperone ratio?
I think that was an unfortunate timing. The history of our global studies trips has been superb other than that recent. We have, this particular program, we have not had any other issues with.
Yeah, I probably have more questions. I think that I agree, the nice thing is that the students are overseen and cared for by the parents of the student in the other country, but there's that day or two sometimes when they land in the country and they're all in a hotel before they get placed in the homes. And yeah, so maybe if we could.
Some other additional pieces to consider in the total look is that obviously we want to have the best quality supervisors and often teachers and staff. These are often 2-week trips. One of the weeks is often over spring break, but the other week is often a week of instruction.
Yeah, it's tough.
So that would reduce some impact on that end.
On the sites, yeah.
On the sites.
And then paying for a substitute.
And additionally, Brian Zalen has done this for years. He's an expert in this area. But obviously, training people to the level of service we want to have is something we need to. He often doesn't have as many people willing to give up their spring break to go on these trips. So I think there's some conversations. This is a great opportunity to talk about training and get on the same page of these global studies protocols with a core group of common staff that go on these trips.
I'm concerned because I'm hearing mostly cost-effective and time-effective rationale rather than rationale that this won't compromise oversight and what our ultimate goal is, safety for these students. So convince me.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was my first question to Brian, and not having been on the trip myself, being concerned, he felt strongly that going up to 24 and having 2 adults would still be within the realm of keeping kids safe and supervised. They follow very strict itineraries and things like that. So, he came to me with this, and the first thing out of the conversation was he feels strongly that we can still maintain the same level of supervision, and in the programs, in these specific programs, with the 12-to-1 as opposed to the 10-to-1.
Did he bring in any other schools, comparable schools, and what their policies are?
I have not seen any comparable schools and policies specific to a global studies type of trip.
Yeah, I need to chew on this a bit. I have the similar concerns, and maybe the concerns could be addressed by different protocols or training, or how much parents really are aware of how much their child is being supervised. I mean, maybe there's other ways to address it, but I do have that. I am concerned for the same reasons that.
Can we see, because this was frustrating to me, this policy was frustrating to me because we've had an issue, but where they come up with plans, they give them to the principal, and yes, we're up here, but at the same time, this is anytime you send students on a field trip, that's something further removed, but we're still responsible for as a school district. So, with Leslie's point, are there protocols we can look at so that we get a set, rather than Brian just coming in and saying, no, I promise. If we're,
Yeah.
Yes, I'm
Yeah, he's standing back.
and so, rather than just trust me, because it is adding, and again, the arguments sound cost effective, but not pedagogically.
Maybe I can work with Dr. Tope and we can bring forward some of the global studies guidelines and protocols for examination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'd find that really helpful.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're on the home stretch, and then we have closed session. Okay, it looks like you're up. Superintendent's report.
I don't have a superintendent's report tonight.
You've been busy?
It's been, and I figured we had to go to closed session. We're heading into graduations. I've done a lot of communicating over the last week, so I think I'll just leave it at that.
We read you in the paper, and so trustee reports. Anyone want to share anything with fellow trustees that we need to know about?
I don't know if I reported on the fact that I think I already did that. Sorry.
Somebody's talking to us. Real quick. Yeah, real quick. I'll just talk over it. So I got a little more information. I went to the meeting today with TBWB and Godby, and I did hear back from a couple of you or 3 of you saying you'd help if you needed it. And I recommend, and I really appreciate it, but I really recommend that Kevin work on it with me because, and here's why. Kevin worked on the parcel tax before as a treasurer. You're on the fiscal advisory committee, and I think it'd be nice to have a trustee that's one of the newly sworn-in trustees along with me. And I have to tell you, originally I was thinking just throw it out, and it wasn't until we started having conversations I realized that I was really the only common thread, because neither Corbett nor Tara were involved last time. I came in to help Laura Anderson. They didn't have the same consultant, and so things keep coming up that I remember why we did it a certain way, and it's just good information. So, and again, you will get all the information. It's really just, in today's meeting, it was that kind of thing. Well, like we said, we think the board's going to want to have more information on polling. It's really to provide that feedback and to take the first read, or they'll show us print collateral, and we'll be able to say, get more student pictures from our district. It's to that level, but any drafts, anything will come to you. We're not going to have information that you don't have. In other words, we're just there to kind of facilitate it. So if any of you have concerns about that decision or suggestion, or if you're just chomping at the bit, you want to do it,
I thank you, both of you, for taking this on. I mean, I hope that...
I don't think it's that much, but yeah.
Well,
but
that
thank
you call upon us, others of us, if you need any kind of assistance, because we do want to be supportive, but I'm delighted that with both of your experience that you're bringing and volunteering this time. I thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You'll be hearing from us, because communications will be coming, one-way communications from Tara. You'll definitely be hearing, so definitely. And there'll be some good meetings and lots of lively discussions at board meetings, I'm certain, as we get presentations. So thank you, and just wanted to. So if you're good with that, that's how we'll go. I don't have any other update, except I'm looking, and I'll bring it to a future meeting. I was looking at other board websites for ideas of how they dealt with legislative issues, and there was one board website outside of California that I liked seeing, that the board actually published a legislative agenda. And I got to thinking about it after we had a couple meetings ago about maybe being more formal and where we stood on some of these issues. So when we had a PTA going out and supporting something, we wanted to maybe be more in front of things, and since that's one of our roles, and this, I'll bring it when we and help it to see what you think of it. But it's a way of looking at our priorities and saying, here's legislation we're tracking that we care the most about that would impact our district. We'd figure out a way ahead of time of how do we do the analysis, and checking for ripple effects, and checking for really the, whether we want to get behind something, whether we do want to write a letter as a board and sign it, that kind of thing. And how do we look at the legislative calendar and get in front of something and do a little bit more than observe, and so on and so forth. So I'll be bringing that back the next time we probably have an update on it, or I'll send it as a one-way for you all to be looking at. Okay, so let's recess to closed session.